Good morning. A warm welcome to the Humanist community of Silicon Valley Sunday Forum. My name is Alex Havasi. I'm a member of the Humanist community. The Humanist community is a chapter of the American Humanist Association, and humanism is a secular and reality-based philosophy of life that affirms our ability and responsibility to lead ethical lives of personal fulfillment that aspire to the greater good. Uh, we value freedom, health, fairness, and using science and reason to acquire and apply knowledge. Special welcome to those who are with us here for the first time. Also, we invite you to continue listening to our weekly forums and other events, which are listed on our website, which unfortunately seem to be down this morning. Please help us to continue to present these forums by donating to the humanist community. And you can do that at our website, which is www.humanists.com.
No, .org.
.org, excuse me. Okay, today Paul George, the director of Peninsula Peace and Justice Center, will comment on the present war between that the U.S. and Israel are waging against Iran. On September 28th, the U.S. and Israel together launched a devastating war against Iran. It quickly became apparent that this assault would be far more destructive than the so-called 12-day war the two countries carried out against Iran's uranium enrichment facilities last June. That attack, it should be noted, marked the first time that the U.S. administration engaged in a coordinated military action with Israel against a local power. While the June attack had a clear goal, it's not at all clear what the two allies share in common as a common goal this time around, beyond the physical devastation of Iran. That could seriously complicate the endgame of this conflict and the future of the region. Paul George has been director of Peace and Peninsula Peace and Justice Center for 36 years. He's been a grassroots activist since his entire adult life, starting as an 18-year-old, 16-year-old, excuse me, my eyes are terrible, organizing and as an organizer and activist against the Vietnam War. Paul's have traveled a war zone as a Central American security activist. He's been arrested for civil rights disobedience several times. In addition to his years at the Peninsula Peace and Justice Center, he's worked for the international solidarity groups, candidates for elected office, and ballot measure campaigns, and as a community organizer for the country's largest healthcare workers union. As a former radio and TV host and frequent public speaker, Paul has developed a reputation for breaking down complex issues and outlining effective ways to organize resistance. So please welcome Paul George.
Thank you, Alex. Hope I can shuffle microphones and papers and glasses and everything else. Well, nice to be here with the Humanists again. I forget the last time I visited. I think it was a couple years ago. And you actually played a video of a Zoom talk that I gave, and I was there to do the Q&A. That was kind of a nice setup. And welcome to everybody watching on Zoom. So first of all, I hope everybody made it out to a No Kings yesterday. The initial reports are 8 million people participated around the country, a new record for the largest protest ever in the United States. And I don't know if you've seen, but they've announced the next action for May 1st. That's a Friday. They're calling it a general strike. Actual general strikes are very hard to pull off, but this is an economic boycott, kind of. Don't buy anything on Friday, May 1st. Don't go out to dinner. Stock up the night before, and it could have a big impact. So when I started to put this talk together, I realized I could do either a political analysis or kind of a battlefield analysis. And since this war was sprung on us literally overnight, news coverage has been pretty much covering the battlefield aspect of it. So I'd like to concentrate on what happened before this war started a great deal. It brought us to this place. So for this talk, I'm going to concentrate on that before story. And hopefully the more current events we can cover in the Q&A and try to do a little brainstorming there. So I'd like to start. I'd like to start with some simple definitions. During the earliest days of this attack, Trump and his self-titled Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, repeatedly used the term war to describe what was happening in Iran. At the same time, his press secretary and numerous other spokespeople for the administration tied themselves into knots trying to use any other term rather than war. And so we ended up hearing constructions like military operation and military mission and critical mission. In order to emphasize the supposed imminent threat posed by Iran, we were told that this was a preemptive strike at times and a defensive strike at other times. By far, my favorite bit of linguistic yoga was Carolyn Levitt's active negotiations under fire. Well, just a few days ago, Trump himself revealed the reason for all the verbal gymnastics. Speaking at a fundraiser on Wednesday, he said, quote, "I won't use the word war because they say if you use the word war, that's maybe not a good thing to do. They don't like the word war because you're supposed to get approval. So I'll use the word military operation, which is really what it is. It's a military decimation," end quote. Well, I think we can all agree, legal shenanigans aside, this is a war, which brings us to another definition. Commentators and reporters use the phrase war of choice quite a bit. And calling this a war of choice is correct in a certain sense, but it's not like picking out what shirt to wear or what to have for lunch. I think the phrase they're really looking for is war of aggression. According to various international agreements, including the International Military Tribunal of Nuremberg, which found German leaders culpable for initiating World War II, and the International Criminal Court, a war of aggression is a military conflict waged without the justification of self-defense, often for territorial gain or, I think in this case, subjugation, in contrast with the concept of a just war or a war of necessity. And according to these same international bodies, a war of aggression is not only an international crime, it is the ultimate international crime. Quoting from the Nuremberg judgment, "War is essentially an evil thing. Its consequences are not confined to the belligerent states alone, but affect the whole world. To initiate a war of aggression, therefore, is not only an international crime, it is the supreme international crime, differing only from other war crimes in that it contains within itself the accumulated evil of the whole," end quote. So is Trump engaged in a war of aggression, or is it a war of self-defense? Trump has claimed that Iran posed an immediate threat to the United States, going so far as to say that Iran could have a nuclear weapon in days. None of that is true. While Iran does have some fairly advanced missiles, none of them has the range to reach Europe, let alone the United States. And Iran's supply of enriched uranium is not highly enriched enough for use in nuclear weapons. It would take months for Iran to turn its uranium stockpiles into weapons-grade material. That is, if Iran's uranium stockpiles weren't buried beneath tons of sand, thanks to Operation Midnight Hammer last June, which I'll return to shortly. But you don't have to take my word for it. Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard testified under oath to the Senate Intelligence Committee on March 18th and sought to defend the war in Iran. In her written testimony submitted to the committee beforehand, Gabbard stated plainly that Iran's nuclear enrichment program was, quote unquote, obliterated in last summer's strike, with, quote, no effort since then to rebuild, end quote, no effort since then to rebuild. But she omitted that passage when reading her remarks aloud. Senator John Ossoff of Georgia asked her to confirm the written remarks, which she did. Then Asaf asked the follow-up, whether or not Iran posed an imminent nuclear threat to the United States, which was the White House's stated justification for war. Gabbard refused to answer. Asaf asked 6 times. Finally, he cut her off. Quote, no, you're evading a question because to provide a candid response to the committee would contradict a statement from the White House, end quote. Trump started this war of aggression on a lie. Before getting to the motives in the current war, I want to take a minute to review the history of Donald Trump versus Iran and Israel versus Iran to see how we've arrived at this particularly fraught moment. It's a story that goes back to Trump's very first speech of his presidential campaign, his first presidential campaign, the famous or infamous Golden Escalator speech. That speech is mostly remembered today for Trump's crass attacks on immigrants, but he also had some things to say about Iran in that speech. In what would become a repeated theme of both his presidential campaigns, Trump condemned endless wars in the Middle East. He found George Bush's invasion of Iraq to be a particularly egregious example that he frequently criticized. But he also claimed in that June 2015 speech that, quote, Iran is going to take over the Middle East, end quote, a claim that has resurfaced today. Now, at the time, Iran did indeed control about 1/3 of Syria and roughly 40% of Iraq. Both of these as a direct result of Bush's disastrous 2003 invasion of Iraq. Today, however, Iran's influence in Syria is just about zero, and it is Israel that occupies some of its territory. Iran's role in Iraq today has been reduced to a loose affiliation with a small handful of extremist groups, which occasionally lob crude missiles at the remaining U.S. military outposts. I'll have more on that in a minute. Trump did make a promise about Iran in that 2015 speech, when he said, quote, I will stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, end quote. What he failed to mention, however, was that at the same time he was giving his speech, the Obama administration had just entered into a framework agreement with Iran to curb any nuclear weapons ambitions that Iran might have had. The framework was agreed to in April 2015, 2 months before Trump's escalator speech, and it was formalized and signed 1 month after Trump's speech. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA, the formal name for the agreement, was the result of 2 years' worth of intensive negotiations among Iran, the US, France, England, Russia, and China, representing the countries with permanent seats on the United Nations Security Council, plus Germany. Under the JCPOA, Iran agreed to constrain its nuclear program by limiting its uranium enrichment activities that could lead to the production of weapons-grade uranium or plutonium. Iran was permitted to continue enriching uranium for strictly domestic purposes, such as nuclear power, nuclear research, and medical applications. The enriched uranium for such purposes is nowhere near the enrichment level necessary to build a nuclear weapon. Iran, in fact, has never enriched uranium to weapons grade levels. The JCPOA restricted the number and type of centrifuges in operation. Centrifuges are what you use to enrich the uranium. It limited the level of uranium enrichment and the size of Iran's enriched uranium stockpile, with substantial amounts of already enriched uranium actually being removed from Iran entirely and transferred to Russia for safeguarding and doled back to Iran as they needed it. Key facilities at Fordow, Natanz, and Arak were repurposed for civilian uses such as medical and industrial research. Iran agreed to accept more intrusive monitoring by the International Atomic Energy Agency. In exchange for complying with these restrictions, Iran received relief from nuclear-related sanctions imposed by the UN, the EU, and the United States. There were other sanctions that remained on Iran as a result of the missile program, support for terrorist groups in the area. So they weren't completely out from under sanctions. After the agreement was signed, though, Israel and Saudi Arabia criticized the agreement, arguing that Iran should not be permitted to have any enriched uranium whatsoever, even for strictly peaceful civilian purposes. By all accounts, the agreement was working exactly as planned. Iran was fully cooperating with the United Nations nuclear inspectors, and its nuclear facilities were an open book. On May 8, 2018, however, Trump, now president, unilaterally withdrew the US from the agreement, calling it a, quote, horrible one-sided deal, end quote, that was, quote, defective at its core, end quote. He described it as disastrous, a disastrous agreement that did not bring peace and vowed to reimpose the highest level of economic sanctions against Iran. In reality, the major defect of the JCPOA was that it had Barack Obama's signature on it. Despite Trump's unilateral action to withdraw from the agreement, Iran voluntarily continued to adhere to the deal, apparently in the hope that the other signatory nations would help to pressure the US to relent. After continuing to abide by the agreement for a full year after Trump's withdrawal, Iran opted to increase the pressure on the other nations that were parties to the agreement by incrementally. What? I want to swap. Oh, thank you. Okay. There's some. Well, that's changed my voice. Okay, not sure why, but oh, okay, that's fine. So Iran opted to, after complying fully, continuing to apply fully for a year, Iran opted to increase the pressure on the other nations that were parties to the agreement by incrementally violating elements of the JCPOA. In June 2019, the first obvious result of Trump's abandonment of the agreement became apparent when Iran announced it would soon exceed the agreement's limit on how much enriched uranium could be stored on Iranian soil. Of course, Iran wasn't technically violating the agreement because Trump had already abrogated the agreement. A few days after Iran's announcement, a US surveillance drone was shot down by Iran near the Gulf of Oman, just a bit south of the now infamous Strait of Hormuz. Iran said the drone was in Iranian airspace. The US said it was over international waters in the Gulf, although it's difficult to understand what the drone might have been spying on out in the middle of the ocean. Regardless of where the drone was, Trump's national security advisors split about whether to respond militarily. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, John Bolton, the national security advisor and ultimate Iran war hawk, and Gina Haspel, the CIA director, all favored a military response. But top Pentagon officials cautioned that such an action could result in a spiraling escalation with risks for American forces in the region. Now, surely Pentagon officials issued those same cautions before this current war was launched. Amazingly, back then, the administration even consulted with congressional leadership before deciding on any action, something unheard of these days. Nancy Pelosi warned Trump that he would need congressional approval for any military action. In the end, Trump did authorize a handful of airstrikes against Iranian radar installations and missile installations. And then something very odd happened. The US planes were in the air, approaching their targets. Navy ships were positioned off the Iranian coast when Trump called it all off and ordered the planes to return to base. Despite repeated inquiries by the media, the White House and Pentagon have never explained why Trump called off the attack. Is it possible that Trump heeded the warnings of his military advisors over his political advisors? If so, this time around, his political advisors have the upper hand. 7 months later, in January 2020, however, any apparent hesitancy to attack Iran evaporated when an Iranian-backed splinter group in Iraq hit an Iraqi military base with a missile. The missile killed a U.S. contractor and injured several U.S. soldiers who were stationed at the base. U.S. intelligence would later surmise that the missile attack was a mistake and not intended as an escalation. The same splinter group routinely fired at or near Iraqi bases where U.S. soldiers were based, but had never killed anyone before or even inflicted much damage. This time, unlike 7 months earlier, when Trump was presented with a variety of possible responses, he chose the most extreme option, the assassination by drone of Major General Qasem Soleimani, Iran's top security and intelligence commander, who was also seen as a potential future leader of Iran. The attack triggered retaliatory strikes against U.S. military bases in the Middle East and brought the United States and Iran to the brink of war just weeks before the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. More than 100 American troops suffered traumatic brain injuries amid Iran's retaliatory strikes. Trump, who cares so much about our troops, downplayed the injuries as, quote, not very serious. I heard they had headaches. Traumatic brain injury. It's a lifelong wound. It wasn't until Trump was out of office in 2024 that Israel and Iran exchanged direct military attacks on each other for the first time, 2024, bypassing the usual practice of using proxies to harass each other. Following the Hamas assault on Israel in October of the year before, Israel undertook a series of assassinations. In April 2024, Israeli jets attacked the Iranian consulate in Damascus, Syria, killing several Iranian military leaders. Iran and Israel exchanged a series of retaliatory strikes. In July of 24, Israel assassinated Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh in Iran's capital, Tehran, and then assassinated Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah and other prominent military commanders in Lebanon in September 2024. In the ensuing exchange of retaliatory strikes this time, Israel destroyed nearly all of Iran's Russian-supplied defensive S-300 missile systems, paving the way for potential and now actual future Israeli strikes. Now, here's the important takeaway from all of this recounting of the back and forth strikes between Israel and Iran during this period. Israel's direct attacks on Iran following the Hamas assault indicated a strategic shift in Israeli policy. In its aftermath, Israel adopted a far more aggressive posture, moving from defensive containment to proactive offense, not just to address immediate threats, but to theoretically prevent future ones that could challenge Israel's security or military and strategic dominance. Now, let's roll the clock forward to 2025. Trump is back in the White House and quickly initiates a maximum pressure campaign on Iran, meaning expanded sanctions against the country, coupled with a push for a new nuclear deal. Iran agreed to return to the negotiating table, and indirect talks mediated by Oman began on April 12, 2025. Trump set a strict 2-month deadline for Iran to reach a, quote, complete and total, end quote, agreement that addressed not just nuclear enrichment, but also ballistic missiles and regional proxies, something the JCPOA had never covered. In May, the International Atomic Energy Agency, which had been monitoring Iran's compliance with the JCPOA and which still had some limited access to Iran's activities, announced they had detected a large increase in Iran's stockpile of enriched uranium. This was true, as it was part of Iran's tactic of incrementally violating the JCPOA to pressure U.S. allies. On June 12th, the IAEA Board of Governors officially declared Iran out of compliance with the agreement. The very next day, Israel launched a massive military assault against Iran, claiming the IAEA findings proved that Iran was just days or weeks away from having enough material for a nuclear weapon, a charge that Israel has been making for about a quarter of a century, and declared that the ongoing negotiations were just a, quote, delaying tactic by Iran. In a clear sign that Israel's strategic shift to proactive offense against Iran was now the motivating force for Israel, Netanyahu's rhetoric justifying the attacks on Iran took on nearly apocalyptic overtones. Netanyahu described the operation as a campaign to, quote, roll back the Iranian threat to Israel's survival, end quote, and to, quote, fend off the threat of annihilation, end quote. On June 22nd, Trump had the U.S. join Israel in its assault, this is 2025 still, join Israel in its assault on Iran as 7 U.S. B-2 bombers struck major facilities in the Iranian nuclear complex. This was a significant step in the Middle East, as it represented the very first time that U.S. military forces had coordinated and engaged directly with the Israeli military in an assault on another country in the region. We had crossed a line. The June attacks were also significant in that the whole episode would soon be repeated nearly step by step in the lead up to today's ongoing war with Iran. A new round of indirect talks between the U.S. and Iran took place in Muscat, Oman, starting on February 6th, moved to Geneva, Switzerland, with negotiating sessions on the 17th and the 26th. February. These talks were mediated primarily by Oman and involved U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi. Omani mediators reported, quote, substantial progress, unquote, as late as February 26th. Iran had reportedly offered a proposal to pause uranium enrichment in exchange for sanctions relief. Iran offered limited enrichment, up to 1.5% with IAEA oversight. The U.S. demanded zero enrichment. Iran even suggested steps to de-escalate its regional proxies, Hezbollah and the Houthis, etc. But the U.S. demanded full disarmament. Trump maintained a maximalist position, demanding the total dismantlement of Iran's nuclear facilities, an end to its ballistic missile program, and the removal of all enriched uranium from the country. All showstoppers as far as Iran was concerned. It's important to note here that Iran is a signatory to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, as is the United States and 187 other countries. Under the treaty's Article 4, member countries have the quote-unquote inalienable right to peaceful nuclear energy, provided they do not take steps toward developing nuclear weapons. It's under the terms of that treaty, by the way, that Iran has continued to allow some access to its nuclear programs to the International Atomic Energy Agency. Toward the end of the last century, it appeared Iran was taking some initial exploratory steps toward nuclear weapons development. But U.S. intelligence agencies have consistently said that Iran abandoned those plans in 2003 and have shown no inclination since then to restart its explorations. By comparison, Israel is not a signatory to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the only country in the Middle East not to have signed it. At the same time, Israel has maintained, quote unquote, nuclear opacity by neither confirming nor denying it has nuclear weapons. As a result of this opacity, IAEA inspectors do not have any access to Iran's nuclear facilities. According to the Federation of American Scientists and other international watchdog organizations, Israel has approximately 90 nuclear warheads and sufficient fissile material for another 100 to 200 weapons. Despite the ongoing diplomatic talks, Trump continually expressed dissatisfaction, stating he was not happy with the pace of negotiations. U.S. officials began publicly labeling Iranian ballistic missiles as an imminent threat to justify a shift toward military action. Again, Iran's missiles are incapable of reaching the United States. What turned out to be the final session of talks took place on Thursday, February 26th in Geneva. Of those talks, the Omani foreign minister said a deal was, quote unquote, within reach, and that there was agreement on big issues like enrichment and stockpiling. In fact, the deal seemed near enough that both sides agreed to meet with International Atomic Energy Agency nuclear experts to go over a host of purely technical details. They even had an appointment with the IAEA set for the following Monday. Instead, the bombs started falling on Iran 2 days later. Once again, in a repeat of the previous June, Iranian negotiators were at the table bargaining in seemingly good faith when they were bombed for their efforts. Now, there was one more major factor at play that turned events to all-out war rather than a repeat of the 12-day war in June 2025. And that was the massive protest by the Iranian people in January of this year. To the Iranian regime, these protests were far more threatening than anything they had confronted for years, not least because the country's bazaris, as they're known, meaning the merchant or business class, were fully behind the protests this time, something that had never happened before. The regime responded with massive force. Thousands, if not tens of thousands of protesters were killed. Thousands more were imprisoned. Many of them are still there. While the uprising was finally put down, the regime was left about as politically weak as they'd ever been. Add to that the fact that Iran's economy was in absolute shambles. Thanks to the maximum pressure sanctions and the domestic upheaval, Iran's currency, the rial, had become nearly worthless. General inflation was running at 68%, while food inflation hit 110%. And again, thanks to the sanctions, roughly half of Iran's industrial capacity was at a standstill by early 2026. In addition, Iran was weaker militarily than it had ever been in the 47 years since the Ayatollahs took power in 1979. Thanks to the numerous Israeli assaults of the previous few years, and especially thanks to the 12-day war, Iran's missile defense systems were practically non-existent, and its radar installations were mostly wrecked. In other words, Iran was left practically defenseless against an air attack. Clearly, the Israelis saw this as a prime opportunity to follow through on their new strategy of proactive offense, to degrade, if not destroy, Iran's missile and nuclear capabilities, and the ultimate goal of regime change for the Islamic Republic. As if to underline this, Netanyahu tweeted shortly after the war began, quote, "I have been waiting 40 years to strike at the terrorist," end quote. Equally clear is that the U.S., that is Trump, had signed off on the plan, and the U.S. and Israel were making plans together for the war. I say that because even though there are many indications since the war began of poor or incomplete planning on the part of the U.S., there must have been some actual advanced planning. You don't hit 15,000 targets without advanced planning. You don't put hundreds of powerful warplanes in the air without close coordination with your ally and advanced planning as to who would do what and when. So why was it that the war started on February 28th, in the midst of ongoing and seemingly on the verge of successful negotiations? Why not wait until you could claim that the negotiations had failed due to Iranian intransigence? That seems to have happened because of events beyond U.S. and Israeli control and planning. It turned out that U.S. intelligence had uncovered Iranian plans for some kind of high-level meeting where a number of Iranian political and military leaders would be physically present together. For Israel, whose goal had become regime change, this was the golden moment to strike, when decapitation of much of the Iranian leadership would be possible to accomplish with a single strike. And so the war began with an attack on the Iranian meeting. Perhaps Israel and the US had not fully completed their planning for the war. Maybe they were moving up their schedule by a little or a lot, but they saw it as an opportunity not to be missed. And they did not miss. The opening salvos of the war killed not only the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khomeini, but many of his family members and numerous political and military leaders. Israel continued to target individual high-ranking members of the Iranian government for assassination, including their intelligence chief, Ali Larijani, who is presumed to have taken control of the government at that point after the loss of the Ayatollah. Israel continues to target Iran's political leaders, even though many analysts say the assassinations are only serving to strengthen the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the main element of Iran's military forces and unquestionably the most radical constituency in Iran. So why does Israel continue with the assassinations? Because they thought that taking out the political leadership could hasten an uprising by the Iranian people to oust the Islamic regime once and for all. And regime change, again, was Israel's ultimate goal for this war. It appears Trump agreed with the Israeli thinking. The New York Times reported on this just a week ago. I'm going to quote from that report. As the United States and Israel prepared to go to war with Iran, the head of Mossad, Israel's foreign intelligence service, went to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu with a plan. Within days of the war's beginning, said David Barnea, the Mossad chief, his service would likely be able to galvanize the Iranian opposition, igniting riots and other acts of rebellion that could even lead to the collapse of Iran's government. Mr. Barnea also presented the proposal to senior Trump administration officials during a visit to Washington in mid-January. Mr. Netanyahu adopted the plan, despite doubts about its viability among senior American officials and some officials in other Israeli intelligence agencies. Both he and President Trump seem to embrace an optimistic outlook. Killing Iran's leaders at the outset of the conflict, followed by a series of intelligence operations intended to encourage regime change, they thought, could lead to a mass uprising that might bring about a swift end to the war. Take over your government. It will be yours to take, Mr. Trump told Iranians in his initial address at the war's start, after saying they should first seek shelter from the bombing. End of quoting from the New York Times. Well, guess what? Iranians are still seeking shelter from the bombing, mostly by leaving the capital altogether, rather than taking to the streets. An uprising is the last thing on their minds. Right now, surviving the US-Israel onslaught is their only immediate goal. The idea that a popular uprising would topple the government and bring about a quick end to the war was so baked into the war plans that among Israel's earliest bombing targets were areas in the remote northwest part of Iran. That's where there's a sizable population of Kurds, an ethnic minority that's spread across parts of Iran, Iraq, and Turkey. The Kurds have been struggling for years to claim an independent or autonomous region of their own. In Iran and Turkey, this struggle has included armed conflict. In Iraq, they had been granted a kind of de facto autonomy in the wake of the US war there. Israel's bombing was intended to open clear lines of attack for the Kurds to join the presumed uprising against the regime. There were two problems with that plan, however, both of which should have been foreseen, I think. First, the Kurds themselves weren't interested in participating. Their fight is not in Tehran. It is in Kurdistan, what they call their region. And the Kurds knew that the Iranian people in the capital would not welcome their assistance. The other problem was with Turkey, which has been fighting a Kurdish liberation movement in their own country for years and years. Turkey's president made it clear to Trump that he would not tolerate the US and Israel arming any Kurds anywhere. Turkey and Iran share a border in Iran's northwest. So Trump quickly put an end to those plans, even while US and Israeli intelligence officials were in the region trying to recruit a Kurdish force. As it stands, Israel has already achieved one of its goals, the degradation and destruction of Iran's offensive capabilities. Their other goal, their ultimate prize, regime change, remains a pipe dream. If Trump somehow manages to extricate himself from the mess he's created, but the Islamic regime is still in place, Trump will claim victory and go on to whatever his next target might be, likely Cuba, as he's promised. If that's the case, Israel will likely stop its own bombing for now. The Iranian regime will work to repair its military capabilities, and Israel will bomb again and again until regime change has been accomplished, with or without US assistance. So no clean end to this war, one way or the other, it seems. Let's turn our attention now to what Trump's motivations might have been to embark on this deadly undertaking. How did he get from no stupid wars to an all-out assault on a country 6,000 miles away? How did he evolve from calling the fighter jets back in 2019 to this war? The first thing one needs to do when trying to figure out, pardon me, first thing one needs to do when trying to figure out Trump's motives for anything is to ask, what's in it for him personally? Everything Trump does, in private life and as president, he does for personal benefit, either financially or psychologically. He's either lining his pockets or burnishing his image, his brand. There is no such thing as, is it good for the country when it comes to Trump? So to begin, I think a case could easily be made that this was an image burnishing exercise for Trump. He is notorious for distracting attention away from anything remotely critical of him, and he has been tremendously vulnerable in that regard with the ongoing Epstein Files scandal, something he just has not been able to slither away from. So you'd be right to think that agreeing to go to war is kind of the ultimate distraction. And so far, he's been right. Although there have been a host of new developments regarding the Epstein Files, mainstream media coverage of the issue has all but disappeared. So you can think of Operation Epic Fury, as it's being called, as really being partly Operation Epstein Fury. Certainly that would have crossed his mind. But I think the real answer lies in what I think of as the Venezuela effect. And the Venezuela effect boils down to this, basically. The attack on Venezuela and the kidnapping of its president in January of this year went off with a hitch, or at least without any major or fatal hitches. Trump couldn't stop talking about it for months. He was still talking about it during the first days of this war on Iran, calling it the quote unquote perfect model for regime change. Add to that the success, in Trump's mind, of the 12-day war against Iran last June, in which the US devastated Iran's nuclear facilities while suffering nary a scratch on its fighter jets. I think Trump has come to believe that the might of the US military can overwhelm any adversary. And so I think he went along with Israel's plan to decimate Iran because he thought it would be quick, easy, and painless. Painless, at least for him. It would be like Venezuela all over again. A quick show of overwhelming force, followed in short order by his adversary's surrender in the face of overwhelming US force and agreement to Trump's terms. That's why Trump, early on during this war, complained about Israel's assassination of potential candidates to do Trump's bidding, complaining that they were killing off the people he had chosen to be Iran's equivalent of Venezuela's Delcy Rodriguez, whom Trump installed as the new compliant leader of that country. He even invoked the Venezuela model while issuing these complaints. Trump expressed surprise that Iran struck back, not only at Israeli targets and U.S. bases in the region, but also by hitting other countries in the area, in some cases attacking their oil infrastructure. I think he truly was surprised that the Iranians had not immediately surrendered. How could they not in the face of such overwhelming force? The same holds true about Trump's expressed surprise when Iran blocked off the Strait of Hormuz, choking off some 20% of the world's oil supply. He had been advised that closure of the strait was certainly possible, indeed was probable, but he didn't think it would apply to this war. According to the Wall Street Journal, and I'm quoting now from the journal, before the U.S. went to war, General Dan Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, told President Trump that an American attack could prompt Iran to close the Strait of Hormuz. Kane said in several briefings that U.S. officials had long believed Iran would deploy mines, drones, and missiles to close the world's most vital shipping lane, according to people with knowledge of the discussions. Trump acknowledged the risks, these people said, but moved forward with the most consequential foreign policy decision of his two presidencies. He told his team that Tehran would likely capitulate before closing the strait, and even if Iran tried, the U.S. military could handle it. End of quoting from the Wall Street Journal. As we all know by now, Trump was wrong on both counts. I'll close with a quick survey of where this leaves us as a country and what the future might hold. America has now invaded two foreign countries in 1 year, this year, Venezuela and now Iran, with no announcement ahead of time, let alone any effort to consult with Congress or international bodies like the UN or US allies. Under Trump, might makes right is the new rule when it comes to foreign affairs. That's why Trump never saw fit to consult with Congress, let alone international institutions such as the UN, before undertaking his adventures in Venezuela and now Iran. Wielding overwhelming power is all the authority Trump feels he needs. Previous presidents have engaged in this consensus building process in the past. America has a vision of itself as participating in and upholding a rule of law and democratic processes. George Bush went to both Congress and the UN for endorsement of his Iraq war. Barack Obama sought UN Security Council approval before intervening in the Libyan civil war. Trump did neither. He simply announced his actions after they had already been set in motion. Since 1986, Congress has required the executive branch to formally communicate its foreign policy, defense capabilities, and security priorities to Congress and the public. The Trump administration's first national security strategy document, issued last year, telegraphed a radical departure from previous U.S. administrations and a complete break with America's prior vision of itself in relation to the rest of the world. Unlike previous administration strategies, there was no mention of defending democracy or human rights or the post-World War II international order. Instead, it described a world in which three major powers, US, Russia, and China, have the right to order affairs as they see fit in their regions of influence. It's a brutal vision of a transactional world where military force alone is decisive. Donald Trump has always been someone who must dominate those whom he sees as opposing him. America under Trump has become a country that will seek to dominate its neighbors, and I'm afraid that means we will see the military might of this country deployed again and again in the 2.5 years remaining of Trump's term. Unless, of course, we, the people, can stop him. I'll close by reminding you that we still have the power to do just that, as yesterday demonstrated, and Trump knows it. Let's get to work. Thank you.
Okay.
You want to read the statement?
Yes. Good point. again, try to limit your questions and comments to 2 minutes. For that you're not doing a crosstalk, because that becomes a conversation between two people. And I've got my alarm set for 12:20 so that we can start winding up at that point. Um, Melinda, you've had your hand up for a while. You're still muted.
Is it me?
Yes, it's you.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah, I had it raised and then it dropped. Yeah, I mean, this is really hard for me. My best friend is from Iran. Her dad was the ambassador to Iran from Germany. And, I get really troubled by like this just like why do we have to start a war? Like I think that's my hard thing is like we don't like this government, but we're not starting a war with North Korea. China has issues up the gazoo with ethics and human violations. But like, so it was really upsetting because, yeah, I got a lot of friends in Iran and they're really stressed out because, their cities have been bombed and Israel. And here's the funny thing is I'm a dual citizen to Israel. So it's kind of funny, but, yeah, but like Israel is committing terrible war crimes. I mean, it's always been Israel's things. I mean, if you knew their relationship with the Palestinians, but like in Iran now, they're doing kind of the same thing. And it's just like, it's emotionally demoralizing. So for me, it's really hard. And I'm trying to reconcile all of it, It's my people, and yet, so anyhow, thank you guys.
Thank you.
I would just say that the question about why Iran and not North Korea is simply answered. North Korea, Trump knows, can shoot back. Iran can't. Again, I think he entered into this because he thought it would be quick and easy, just like Venezuela. North
Well,
Korea
he was
has not
very
been.
wrong because he didn't understand Iran had a lot of missiles and so but yeah, I totally agree. I think he went into it thinking he could get away with it. It would be easy and that's Trump. So sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I totally agree with your premise.
Okay,
Idris.
Idris.
Hi. So, over the past 4 weeks now, something has gone under the radar, and it's very important that everybody should know this, but an F-35, the world's most stealth jet, was shot down. So, then all of a sudden he said, "Oh, I had a meeting, so we're gonna calm down." But an F-35 being shot down is big news. So, and then on another note, it'd be nice for all Americans, inside double quotes, to educate themselves on the difference between there's a clear border physically between Iran and Iraq, and that divides a language border and cultural border. So Iranians are not Arabs. And I just had a coworker who said, "Oh, Iranians are Arabs, and I know an Arab," and I'm like, he's not your friend if you call him an Arab.
Good points to make. Thank you.
I had a comment there. I think the nature of war has changed recently also. That
want to respond to those?
Yeah, did you want to respond to that?
Uh, just acknowledging his excellent points. Yes,
Yeah, and I think
that's great.
the nature of war has changed. We've seen this in Ukraine and other smaller wars in the Near East. That drones are playing a much bigger part. Paul, do you want to comment on that?
That's a key issue here, and I'm glad you brought it. Yes, Iran's missile capabilities have been greatly degraded, but they have a very, very advanced drone program. They started developing drones a long time ago. I forget the exact time, but it's like about 15 years ago. And it has been so successful, they are supplying Russia with drones for their fight against Ukraine. And Ukraine itself has gotten into the drone development business. So what we're running into now, seeing happen in regard to the war in Iran, is that the remaining missiles by Iran were fired off, intercepted by $300,000 Patriot missiles, which are now mostly used up. And the drones come swarming across the borders in waves of hundreds, and they can't be taken down. And it's drones that have hit the U.S. military bases that have killed our 13 soldiers so far and wounded scores, some very serious. It was drones that just hit a U.S. base in Saudi Arabia just this week, injuring dozens. And so that's an aspect of future wars, as you say. That is a new element here. And despite the fact that presumably a lot of the missile factories, where you actually need a large factory to build a missile, Iran's missile factories have probably been taken out. Drones can be made in garages. They're made at home with, printers. There's no big industry. And so Iran will continue to be armed with these drones at the very least. And one more point to make about the switch to drone warfare. The U.S. does seem to be way behind the curve in developing drones for offense or defense. And I would submit that part of that is the fact that if you were Lockheed Martin, which would you choose want to make? $300,000 Patriot missile or a $10,000 drone? Yes.
The other comment. Emma. You're still muted.
Sorry.
There we go.
Hi, everyone. I learned about this event this morning, and my whole family are in Iran. I am an Iranian. Because this topic is very emotional to me, I wrote my saying. It takes like 2 minutes, but I want to read it from my draft. A voice for people of Iran. I'm Iranian and my entire family still lives in Iran. I am deeply opposed to war, but I also want to share what many people inside Iran are experiencing because their voices are often missing from these conversations. For 47 years, the people of Iran lived under the rule of the Islamic Republic, a system that imprisons journalists, suppresses women, and violently crushes protests. Many of you remember protests after the death of Mahsa Amini in 2022, Women Life Freedom Movement. Millions of Iranians protested peacefully, knowing the price could be prison, torture, or death. And yet, they marched anyway. But this repression didn't stop there. According to Iran's own Ministry of Health, during the protest on January 8 and 9 this year, security forces killed a large number of people, more than 30,000 people. Stocks of body bags were exhausted. Whether the final number proves lower or higher, the message to Iranian people was clear. Peaceful protests can met with extreme violence. For decades, Iranians have tried every possible path to change their country from within. Reform movements, elections, protests, civil disobedience. Again and again, these efforts have been crushed. Many ordinary people in Iran feel a deep frustration about this regime. While people struggle with economic hardship at home, billions of dollars are spent on proxy wars, terrorist groups. You mentioned Hezbollah and Houthi correctly. Uranium enrichment is up to 60%, while civilian usage is 3 to 5%. So when people discuss peace in the region, many Iranians ask a painful question: what about peace for Iranian people? It's important to remember something fundamental. Iran is not its regime. Iran is a civilian, thousands of years old. Its poem, scientists, artists, students, and family who want same basic things people everywhere want: dignity, freedom, and ability to shape their own future. Those of us in Iran, as Iranian diaspora, often hold two truths at the same time. We fear war, but we also know that suffering caused by the regime that rules our country is more painful. Peace is not only the absence of bombs, peace is also presence of freedom. My hope is that conversations like this can hold a space for both truths: a deep desire to avoid war and a deep desire of millions of Iranians to finally live in free and democratic country. If you want to hear from someone who many inside Iran and in diaspora see as unifying voice for change, I encourage you to watch recent speech of Reza Pahlavi, who is the son of last king of Iran. Almost done. Uh, he outlines how a free Iran is better for Middle East, USA, and for the world. Thank you for listening, and thank you for organizing this and for spending your Sunday on having this thoughtful conversation. I appreciate your valuable time.
Thank you very much for those very thoughtful comments. And I think we all stand in awe of the courage of the Iranian people, what they've shown in protest after protest, and as you say, brutally put down time and time again. But this war is not a war of liberation for the Iranian people. And I'm afraid the blowback, the results of the devastation that's being wreaked on Iran right now will actually harm the efforts of the Iranian people in the near term and maybe long term to seek the freedom that they have been courageously struggling for so many years. This is, you do not do a popular uprising from the sky by dropping bombs. There are many, many ways the United States could have been supporting the Iranian people in their struggle for freedom for many years now. We've never undertaken to do that. This is not support for freedom or liberation. This is an aggressive war of subjugation of the United States against Iran. And it really has very little, Trump really does not care about the Iranian people or their struggles. Thank you again.
Yeah. Thank you, Paul. Melinda.
Yeah, Emma, it was like I'm gonna finally be on camera, even though it's terrible. Emma, like your words were just inspiring. My best friend is from Iran, and like hearing her grow up under the regime, and it was really hard. And it sucks because I've been to Iran. Uh, like it was kind of a side show. I was in Armenia and I ended up getting sidetracked to Iran. But yeah, seeing like the regime, like how things are, it just makes you sad. So I just wanted to just point out I appreciate your words. So that's mostly what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Yeah, I
Thank
was
you. I
thinking
appreciate it.
also while she was talking, it seems whenever we go to war, whenever anyone goes to war, it doesn't spark an uprising. It inspires loyalty even to a brutal regime. And I doubt that's increased the or decreased the opposition of the majority of the Iranian people. But as you said before,
We don't have that
the
problem. Has
Islamists
been
have
a
become
lot of
that
uprising. I'm so sorry. There has been a lot of uprising. We don't lack that. Just in January 8 and 9, millions of people were rising up. But when the only answer to uprising, to protests, is killing, it's just showing that if you kill enough, you can stay in power. And people of Iran, inside and outside of Iran, were dancing out of like happiness when the supreme leader was dead.
Okay. Um, Sandra.
Yeah,
So,
I think our speaker ended with a call that we could do something about this. So rather than debating about the Iranian people, I'd like him to elaborate on that and talk about the actions we can take that will make a difference today, not the past about how this has come about from people who aren't interested in action. Thank you.
Well, it's certainly an topic, and I'm glad you asked. There are a number of things we can do. Yesterday, when 8 million people took to the streets, that's one of the things that we can do. You may not think that going out in the streets like that has a big effect, but it does, because the people in power kind of look at things in a with a kind of an accountant's eye toward things. There's a ledger book. And one of the things that gets entered on that ledger book as a deficit is social unrest. They would much rather the country be calm and quiet and just go along with everything. So those demonstrations provide a stark contrast to Washington. And they also build to the next one. 8 million is maybe not enough, but these actions are worthwhile. And that's why we need to get out for each and every one of them. On a more practical matter, there is currently a $200 billion request coming to Congress to pay for this war in Iran. $200 billion. Some people have said, oh, that's just an opening bid. They'll be able to negotiate it down and say, look, we gave in some. I don't care if it's 1 billion, 200 billion. Congress cannot approve 1 penny for this. And we have to make sure they hear. And that means contacting your Democratic representatives, if that's who represents you, even though you might think, oh, they're going to vote no for it. They said at their last call they're going to vote for it. Call or write anyway. When they have 10,000 letters come into their office, they go up on Capitol Hill and say, my constituents will have my head if I vote yes for 1 penny for this. So contacting your representatives is always something that needs to be done. And this is something directly related to this war that we can make a big issue just in the coming weeks. It does look like this war is going to go far beyond the 4 to 6 weeks Trump originally predicted. The newspapers today are talking about actual troop deployments in the region, and that takes us to a whole different level of war. So, contact Congress, stay in the streets on May 1st. Make sure we have an economic impact. That's something that's going to be easily demonstrated if economic activity in this country drops close to zero on Friday, May 1st. So keep that in mind and participate in what they're calling a general strike. It's really an economic boycott of this war and all the other depredations that the Trump administration is putting on this country. And of course, November is pretty critical. Congress has completely given away their constitutional role in terms of taking this country to war. They've given away their constitutional role in a lot of other ways too, just ceding power to Trump. Congress has to be taught a lesson that they need to take a look at Article 1 of the U.S. Constitution. They are the first branch of government mentioned in the Constitution because they represent the people. We have to make sure they represent us. So November could be a turning point, because if Trump loses Congress, he's done.
Okay, still almost a year away, which seems like a long time the way things are going.
8 months.
8 months.
And that is a long time these days, Alex.
Yeah,
I absolutely
a
agree.
week is a long time these days. Melinda.
Yeah, I appreciate I missed your name. I apologize, but he just talked very concisely and important, because I was gonna say everything that's going on. Like, I recalled the first time I voted, and I voted in person. I was up in Humboldt County and went into a booth, and that was the last time I voted in person. I'm like a total mail-in ballot, and I was just thinking of like this regime's, like, like trying to get rid of mail-in ballot, even though Trump does it, and how, like, it's convenient. Like, when you work, it's, you don't have a lot of time, and it's more difficult. So yeah, so I was thinking just about, like, we should be promoting participation, not inhibiting it. And so that was kind of my thought in the discussion. And I just wanted to share that because, yeah, I remember, I was like, I think I just turned 18, and it was the first time I got to vote. And it was magnificent, I remember going to the booths and everything. And I think that we should encourage that for all Americans. So, yeah, that's all I had to say. I just felt like people should know, the importance of it and participation. So thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, you would think that if somebody is in favor of democracy, they would do everything they could to increase voter participation. Trump's efforts are all going the other way, and that's because democracy is an inconvenience to Trump. It is an inconvenience to him.
Okay, Senna.
November isn't that far away. Early money is the best money. Those people that are hoping to make a difference are working on that right now. And the more we can help them, the better. It's more important to do it now than at the last minute.
Thank you.
In campaigns is a good thing. The point about early money is also important, because one of the things that's come into play in elections these days are the monthly campaign finance reports that every campaign has to file with the Federal Election Commission. And so I know, today's the 29th. My phone is going to be buzzing like mad with texts coming in from politicians desperate to crank up their fundraising as the end of the month comes around. It's predictable. So especially giving at the end of a month, it's $5 or $10. They report how many donors they have and how much money got donated. Boosting up the number of donors, even if you're giving $5 or $10 or $25 at a time, does have a dramatic political effect in these races. So I And I contribute to a lot of non-California states myself, even though I don't have a heck of a lot of money. I do know that my $5 and $10 uh, does have an effect. So that's another aspect to think about. Thank you.
So, thank you. Good advice.